when we talk about community engagement, we have to start our reflections from three different concepts that have been analyzed in Europe and in European cultural studies already at the end of the 90s of the last century. And these concepts are access, participation, and representation. They were analyzed and studied as the main basis, let's say, of the barriers that can be found in the cultural sector, which prevent different groups of society to participate, to take part in the cultural life of their communities, as stated, for example, by Article 27 of the Declaration of Human Rights. Why are these three concepts so strictly related to the idea of barriers? Access, first of all, has to be intended not as merely economic access, which is for sure a barrier still nowadays, but it's not the only one. There are other barriers connected to the word access, such as geographical access, cultural access, and physical access. Now, we know that in most of European countries, economic, geographic, and physical access have been tackled and somehow solved as main problems. What remains to be solved is the problem of cultural access, which, as data show, is still very much related to social, cultural, and educational background of people. Therefore, it is the most complex problem, critical problem related to access, because it is about interpretation, acknowledgement of values, and also in this case, the bias is really doing a great job in terms of allowing cultural access to the description of the collections to be revised and seen in a different perspective. The second element is representation. As we know, cultural heritage collections in Europe are the product of a dominant elite which decided and chose at the time what kind of objects to expose, to let's say, make available to people, and what sort of description and explanation make available to people. It was a very strong means to communicate values which were also linked to national state values and to the creation of national states in Europe. Therefore, we can see and we know that most of these values are absolutely not in line with the contemporary plurality and changes which are still happening in a very fast way in our society. Representation means, therefore, to give the opportunity to all different components of society to be represented in museums and in museums' collections. The work that the bias is doing with changing or suggesting new words, detecting biased words, goes exactly in this direction. The third element is participation, which does not mean only participation in cultural activities, but mainly, more importantly, participation in decision-making processes, again in the light of the Faro Convention. It is something very difficult to be achieved because allowing for decision-making processes to be opened to different stakeholders means to lose somehow control or power from the side of cultural institutions. Therefore, it's a very delicate matter, And it's something that de-bias is also trying to tackle by engaging communities in this process of attributing new values, new perceptions, new points of view to the description of heritage collections. These three aspects have been, let's say, embedded into a very meaningful heritage policy, which has been developed by the European Commission in 2015. It is a policy which is related to the concept of audience development. The concept of audience development might seem a bit far away from what we are talking, because we are talking of community engagement. But actually, this is not true, because if we analyze the study on audience development, which was proposed by the Commission in 2015 and published in 2016, in that publication, the idea of audience development embeds the three concepts that we have been analyzing so far: access, participation, representation, and promote the diversification of audiences, which can be very clearly linked to the idea of community engagement. How? First of all, because the term audience has to be intended not just as spectators or visitors, but as all the stakeholders which are interested in processes of cultural participation and cultural meanings making. It's not limited to those who go to museums or go to theaters or participate actively in creative processes, but it is open to all possible stakeholders within society. And in this way, the link between audience development and community engagement becomes very clear and very transparent, mainly because it is based on this idea of diversification, trying to include in cultural participation different groups and not just those who are the usual goers or the usual participants to cultural activities. Within the de-bias project, we then refer to communities and not to audiences. But which are the strategies taken from the experience of the audience development studies and examples that can be used and are currently being used in the de-bias project to engage communities? These strategies are mainly four, but they are all aiming at the main goal, which is the achievement of a fifth strategy that we will see in a minute. The first four strategies are place, investing in places which can be safe places, both physically or virtually, for different people to express their own visions, their own ideas. Again, we go back to this concept of legitimizing people, allowing them to be the real main stakeholders of the cultural meaning creation process. The second strategy is digital. Again, the use of digital tools can, let's say, foster the participation of groups of society or local communities which are not used to participate. Of course, we know that the use of digital can also create biases and gaps. But for example, in the case of de-bias, we are working towards the achievement of a tool that could be easily used by cultural institutions with the input of local communities in terms of detecting and curating harmful language in cultural heritage collections, which is the title actually of the de-bias project. The third strategy is capacity building. In order to ensure that a process like the diversification of participants take place, it is very important to transfer knowledge and competences to cultural heritage professionals. Cultural heritage professionals need to be updated, need to be challenged in a way in order to try different ways to engage with different people. This is something that the de-bias project takes very seriously, since the capacity building part of the project is one of the main part of it, and it is one of the main investment that the project is doing in order to foster these processes of widening the vision, widening the competences and the skills of cultural heritage professionals. The fourth strategy is co-creation. Well, co-creation is obviously at the basis of the de-bias project, since the tool, the AI tool, which will be used to detect biases in cultural heritage collections, is based on a vocabulary which is actually a product co-created with communities. Therefore, the project makes use of this fourth strategy in a very clear and strong way. I said at the beginning that the four strategies are actually all concurring to the achievement of a fifth strategic result. This result is organizational change. The main objective of all audience development strategies and community engagement strategies is to change the point of view of cultural organizations and cultural institutions, which should be able, at the end of this journey, to put people at the center of what they do, meaning that it's not just a matter of inviting people to have access to cultural heritage, but it is a matter of considering people and communities as stakeholders in the definition of meanings, in the attribution of meanings. Of course, in order to do that, cultural institutions not only need the strategies that we have been mentioning, but also, for example, the capacity of creating networks, of creating partnerships with different organizations in society which can act as bridges, as mediators towards local communities.